get that dang screwdriver out of my head.
When Return of the Living Dead was released in 1985, no one, especially Hemdale or Orion Pictures, would have expected it to be the hit that it was. Orion wasn't particularly proud of Return of the Living Dead, which is why they were not involved in the sequel for the movie. Producer Tom Fox started to search for new distribution for the Part 2, and found a home with Lorimar Pictures. Soon, Tom Fox got in touch with James Caron, couldn't wait to tell him the good news about the deal he got to do Return of the Living Dead Part 2. James Caron told Tom Fox he would have loved to have been in Part 2, but unfortunately in Part 1, his character died. But Tom Fox told him that's not a problem. Controversy began when director and writer Ken Wiederhorn came into the picture. Despite Ken being the writer and director of Return of the Living Dead Part 2, he wasn't a horror fan, but he knew what he had to do to get his foot in the door with these production companies. Tom went back to try to assemble the team that he had for Return of the Living Dead. When he met with co-producer Graham Henderson, Henderson was less than thrilled when he learned that the movie was basically going to be the same exact thing as the first one. Graham was pretty surprised that they were basically making the same film again, and he decided not to be involved. Things got even worse for Tom Fox when production designer William Stout even threatened to sue if they used any of his designs in Part 2. One big mystery that remains was Dan O'Bannon. We would have thought Dan would have came back to direct the Part 2 to his really successful first Return of the Living Dead. But there's not much documentation on whether Tom Fox reached out to Dan, or if Dan expressed any interest at all to be involved with this picture. Needless to say, he was not involved in this at all, and everything went down to Ken Wiederhorn. One name that we did see return to Return of the Living Dead Part 2 was makeup effects artist Kenny Myers. Once the team was assembled for Return of the Living Dead Part 2, it was a surprise to a lot of people that comedy was going to be the forefront of this movie as opposed to horror, with comedy coming out of the situations as what happened in Return of the Living Dead Part 1. Members of the crew such as Kenny Myers and Brian Peck, who was a punk rocker in Return of the Living Dead Part 1, expressed a lot of concern to Ken Wiederhorn about bringing the comedy to the forefront, but they were met with little regard from director Ken Wiederhorn. Two returning faces to Part 2 were Tom Matthews and James Caron, having a similar relationship to what they had in the first Return of the Living Dead. The beginning of Return of the Living Dead Part 2 was one of the 245 trioxin barrels, which was on the back of a US military tank, falls off into a river in a suburban town. The next day, three young kids go to their clubhouse, which was a mausoleum in a cemetery, tried to initiate the young boy Jesse, but Jesse got away. The boys then stumble upon the 245 trioxin barrel near the mausoleum. When young Jesse sees that there's an army logo on the side of the tank, he quickly yells that he wants to reach out to the army and call them. Two bullies let Jesse know they're not going to let him do that. As the boys take off, a big van pulls up near the mausoleum, where Ed, Joey, and Karen pull up. Ed's taking Joey to start his new job with him. Joey soon finds out that his new job is robbing graves, taking jewelry off of corpses, even taking a severed head off one of the corpses. While these two are in the mausoleum robbing jewelry off of dead bodies and even taking heads off of them, two young boys that were the bullies go back to look at the 245 trioxin barrel. Not realizing the danger that they were partaking in, they accidentally crank this 245 trioxin barrel open, and that chemical spreads all throughout the cemetery. Enter Return of the Living Dead Part 2. You've now made it to the review portion of this video. I hope you guys learned a little bit of information about how Return of the Living Dead Part 2 came to be, and there was a lot of controversy in the beginning. I just want to say, for Return of the Living Dead Part 2, this is a film that's either loved or hated, and I can definitely understand why. Bringing the comedy to the forefront was a risky move by Ken Wiederhorn, but I recently watched a new documentary with him, and he was very adamant about wanting to do this. He did not want to make a movie exactly like Dan O'Bannon's, and I can respect that because Dan didn't want to make a real sequel to Night of the Living Dead, so being original is something I can appreciate. One really plus I can say about Return of the Living Dead Part 2 that I like a lot was the makeup effects from Kenny Myers. This movie had a little bit more budget and a little bit more time, and you really get to see a more uniformity to these zombies in the movie. There's a lot of shades of blue and great makeup effects work from Kenny Myers. The zombies in Return of the Living Dead Part 2 look absolutely fantastic. Another thing I really like about Return of the Living Dead Part 2, as well as what the first one had, is a fantastic score. Return of the Living Dead Part 2 has a great score. With the comedy coming to the forefront, it's either going to be one thing that people love or one thing that people hate. It's not really like Return of the Living Dead Part 1, despite the fact that the story takes place in more or less of a hyper-reality. The relationship between James Caron and Tom Matthews is still just as good in my opinion in Part 2. They play off of each other very well, and the comedy between them is not lost. Interestingly enough, with Ken Wiederhorn not really being a horror movie fan, I still think he did a fantastic job directing this movie. There's really no hiccups or anything in this movie that stalls or makes it boring. It's got a good flow to it, especially with having kids as the main focus of the movie. All in all, I still think Return of the Living Dead 2 is a fantastic sequel to the first one, and there's really no way you could have followed it up trying to make a movie just like it anyway, so I think Ken actually did the right move making comedy the forefront. I'm a big advocate for Return of the Living Dead Part 2, but I understand it's not going to be for everybody. If you haven't checked it out, I really suggest you do. Thank you guys for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to Christian Wiederhorn and hit that bell to be notified when I upload more videos. Eventually we'll get to Return of the Living Dead Part 3. Until then, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.